Hello and welcome to Asia Today. I'm Keshini Navaratnam. In this program, we look at the aftermath of Tuesday's attacks in New York and Washington. With grieving Americans convinced that the Saudi-born dissident Osama bin Laden is to blame, frightened Afghans brace themselves for possible US retaliation. The investigation into Tuesday's devastating attacks in the United States is gathering pace. The FBI says that it's identified most of the hijackers of the planes used in the attacks on Washington and New York, and is now looking for others who may have been involved. Pakistan's President General Pervez Musharraf has promised the United States Pakistan's full cooperation in the fight against terrorism following the attacks. Meanwhile, there's been considerable speculation about a retaliatory US strike against Afghanistan, where the main suspect, the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden, is hiding. Some reports suggest that bin Laden has been placed under house arrest.
An unusual video disc has come to light in Pakistan. Apparently released by Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda movement, it shows young Muslims receiving military training. It's not clear where or when these exercises were filmed, but the message that's being conveyed is unambiguous. Osama bin Laden, who's long sought refuge in Afghanistan, is seen in the video delivering a speech. Your brothers in Palestine are waiting for you desperately, he says. They're waiting for you to hit back at Israel and the United States. The video discs are being sold in shops and stalls in Karachi. Pakistan is only one of 3 countries that recognizes the ruling Taliban in Afghanistan, the movement that's given sanctuary to Osama bin Laden. For the second day running, though, Pakistan's military leader has been at pains to emphasize his support at this crucial time for the United States and the fight against terrorism.
Pakistan has been extending cooperation to international efforts to combat terrorism in the past and will continue to do so in the future.
The Americans have not yet produced any evidence linking Tuesday's attacks to Osama bin Laden. But in the Afghan capital, Kabul, there's understandable nervousness and trepidation about a possible US retaliation. Foreign diplomats and relatives of the 8 international aid workers currently on trial there are leaving in some haste.
Nothing forced us to leave, but our governments have decided we should return to Islamabad.
Unfortunately, the detainees have to stay here, but we have provided legal assistance for them, and we will closely monitor from Islamabad the case. We will get in contact again with the Taliban embassy in Islamabad, and we will do our best to find a solution for the ongoing trial.
Earlier, staff from the aid agency Médecins Sans Frontières also left Kabul. A spokesman for the Taliban has said they don't expect an American attack on Afghanistan in the near future. Nevertheless, the evacuation of almost all foreigners from the country should be completed by the end of the day. Peter Biles, BBC News.
Well, as speculation mounts about what action the United States might take and against whom, frightened residents in the Afghan capital Kabul are bracing themselves for a possible attack. There are reports that residents had begun digging trenches in anticipation of US retaliation and that other fortifications were being made. Local residents are also appealing to the United States to think carefully about any action.
The United States attack Afghanistan, it will have tragic come out for the people, which we already have experienced for the past 23 years.
As an Afghan youth, I condemn this possible attack on our country. It would be a hideous act. Americans should not attack, as our people are very poor and weak.
We are Muslims and we have no fear about any attack. We rely on God. But without any evidence, an attack would be bad and an illogical act.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Maulana Samiul Haq, a religious scholar and chairman of the Afghan and Pakistan Defence Council in Akora-Katak, near Peshawar in Pakistan. I asked him why the Taliban were insisting on sheltering Osama bin Laden when the lives of so many Afghans could be endangered if there was an American attack.
The Taliban believe enough injustice has already been done to the Afghanis. The country was already destroyed by Russia. Now, if America bombs Afghanistan because of one person and wants to annihilate the entire Afghan population, it will then not be the worst kind of international terrorism? If killing innocent civilians is a crime at the World Trade Center, then what justification there is to annihilate the entire population because of just one person? It will be a loss to America, and it will give it a bad name in the international community. The Taliban are willing to negotiate and hold an inquiry by an impartial court.
A few moments ago, at a press conference, President Bush warned Americans not to retaliate against Arab Americans and Muslims, as suspicions mount that overseas Islamic extremists may have plotted coordinated attacks on U.S. soil. He also took a question on whether Pakistan will help hunt down those responsible.
His willingness to work with the United States, and I appreciated that statement, and now we'll just find out what that means, won't we? We will give the Pakistani government a chance to cooperate and to participate as we hunt down those people who committed this unbelievable, despicable act on America.
Well, we can now go over live to our correspondent in Islamabad, Susanna Price. President Bush there was, of course, referring to General Musharraf's offer to the United States to give its full cooperation. Were you surprised by that move by General Musharraf?
Well, General Musharraf has said since the news came through about these attacks that he's condemned them, he's offered his condolences to the American people. Pakistan has been a long-time ally of the United States, but of course it's also seen as the main supporter of the Taliban. So it is surprising in some ways the unstinting backing that he seems to be giving to America, and the little emphasis really on the Taliban and what their case might be. So some people are believing this could be a shift in Pakistani policy, although it doesn't seem that any final decision has been taken as yet.
Well, one Western diplomat has described this as a defining moment for Pakistan, a chance to prove that it is not on the fringes of Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic radicalism. How far do you think that's true, Susie?
Well, I think it very much depends what Pakistan's actions are. We've heard the words, but we're not exactly sure what the Americans want Pakistan to do, whether they want Pakistan to help provide evidence which could implicate Osama bin Laden in these attacks, or whether it wants Pakistan to go much further and to provide airspace or even the use of its own territory for attacks inside Afghanistan. I think also it will depend on whether Pakistan is seen as acting alone in conjunction with the United States or as part of a wider alliance. And if it's seen as one country among many, especially if there are many Islamic countries that are involved, it won't be seen as such a risky venture for President Musharraf.
Well, what are the dangers of Pakistan being seen to side too openly and too readily with the United States against Islamic radicalism, do you think?
Well, obviously the main dangers will come from religious extremists at home, and that will very much depend on what President Musharraf is seen to be doing, how close he's seen to be getting with the Americans, and how much he can convince the people here, his own government, and the more radical elements that this is the only path, and this is the path that there's an alliance, many countries joining together. It's not just Pakistan forging out on its own and betraying, possibly that will be seen as a betrayal of its former ally, the Taliban.
Susanna Price in Islamabad, thank you very much for joining us. Afghanistan's Northern Alliance, which opposes the ruling Taliban, has appointed a new military chief to replace the leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud. An official at the embassy in neighbouring Dushanbe said that the exiled president, Burhanuddin Rabbani, had replaced Massoud with a general named Mohammed Fahim. He said that President Rabbani took the decision in consultation with Commander Massoud, who is still alive after an attack. He explained that the replacement was only until Massoud had recovered from wounds. Well, with me in the studio is John Butt, the Muslim chaplain at Cambridge University, who has close knowledge of the Taliban. John Butt, welcome to BBC World News. Why are the Taliban persisting in sheltering Osama bin Laden when potentially the lives of so many Afghans are at risk?
Yes, it is a good question, and maybe they didn't realize that what the repercussions might be. Certainly what now look as if there are going to be the repercussions. One doesn't really know how much Osama bin Laden is supporting the Taliban financially, and one doesn't really know what the Taliban have to gain from protecting him in this way. Of course, there is, as the Taliban say, a long-standing Afghan tradition of harboring guests, even harboring outlaws. But one of the conditions of that sort of hospitality is that the guest should not violate the hospitality. And that means not committing atrocities against people in other countries. And that, of course, was a condition that the Taliban stipulated and mentioned very vehemently, that they were insisting that Osama bin Laden should not involve himself in any type of political or militant activity outside Afghanistan.
So what chances are there, do you think, that the Taliban might hand over Osama bin Laden?
Well, certainly, of course, there were indications this morning, I don't know how much they're true, that he might be under house arrest, and the indications at this time seem to be that that yes, there is a possibility of this happening. I mean, I would think it more possible that they himself could possibly bring him to book if he is. No one knows that he is, if he is guilty of this atrocity, if he has had a hand in this atrocity. They could themselves bring him to book for committing atrocities against civilians, for killing Muslims. There are crimes inherent in this act which has taken place in America, crimes in Islam which are completely and utterly abhorrent in Islam, and the Taliban could possibly bring him to book for those crimes. It might be difficult for them politically to hand him over to America.
How strong is the Taliban's position in Afghanistan? Of course, it's a country that has been riven by civil war.
Yes. Well, that was really why the Taliban initially were quite popular, because people saw that they did bring peace, and they did bring security. And a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be supporters of the Taliban have spoken to me and said, well, you know, at least we do have peace, and at least we do have security. So that's really the main cause of the Taliban's popularity. But people did expect some sort of economic dividend to follow on this peace dividend. And that hasn't happened yet in Afghanistan, so I don't know how long the Taliban's support can go on without this economic dividend taking place.
What can you tell us about the replacement of Ahmad Shah Massoud as the leader of the Northern Alliance? We don't know whether Ahmad Shah Massoud is dead, whether he's still alive, but potentially if you have a new leader, what impact is that likely to make perhaps on the Taliban's position and the opposition to it?
Well, General Fahim has a long track record, and he has got a lot of military experience. But the thing is, of course, he doesn't have the charisma, he doesn't have the aura about him that Ahmad Shah Massoud has. And so, of course, it will be a psychological blow for the Northern Alliance to have to follow a person who is not as nationally or internationally well known. One has to remember that Ahmad Shah Massoud has been a symbol of the opposition, first of all, to communism, but even before the Soviet invasion to President Dawood, he was a symbol of this opposition for a long, long time. And of course, General Fahim cannot inherit that mantle automatically.
John Butt, thank you very much for that. Well, as shock gave way to anger around the world after the horrific attacks in the United States, an unprecedented coalition of Washington's allies and rivals declared war on terrorism. In Japan, the ruling Liberal Democratic Party tabled a parliamentary motion to enable its defense forces to defend US bases. That's a task which was denied them under current law.
The United States Embassy in Tokyo open again after closing down for 24 hours. This embassy received a warning of a possible terrorist attack just last week. Security measures have been tightened still further. Some came to express their condolences. There's overwhelming sympathy here for the United States and an acute awareness of Japan's own vulnerability.
It's the pain so much that I can't express anything. I can only pray in silence and hope that their families, friends, and people around the world, will somehow heal.
Japanese officials have hinted at changing laws so the defense forces can cooperate more closely with the United States. It's our duty as an ally to support the United States. In fact, it's an obligation, said the Chief Cabinet Secretary. Japan is the center of American military power in Asia. 46,000 troops are permanently stationed here. The bases are on high alert. The naval station at Yokosuka is home to a carrier fleet that projects US power as far as the Indian Ocean. It could play an important role in the retaliation that's sure to follow. Charles Scanlon, BBC News, Tokyo.
Well, China has appealed to NATO to consult countries outside Europe before responding to the attacks on the United States. Beijing said that it fully supported resolute action against terrorism, but it believed that any military actions undertaken by NATO would have implications far beyond the borders of Europe. In a separate development, a senior Chinese official says that President Bush has told the Chinese President Jiang Zemin that he will travel to China next month for the APEC meeting. Well, with me in the studio is the BBC's former Beijing bureau chief, Humphrey Hawksley, who has written extensively on security in Asia. Humphrey, we heard there briefly China's reaction to these devastating attacks in the United States. Just how important does it stand?
Well, I think China's becoming more and more crucial because it does have relationships with many of the rogue states, such as Iran, the Sudan, Pakistan, which is also pivotal to this. And I think that the key thing that the Americans are going to have to do here is try to get China on board while not doing a strike against any particular target which is going to anger them.
Well, which way is China likely to go? It has provided extensive military support to Pakistan. Is that likely to continue, do you think?
Well, I expect that there are negotiations going on in Beijing right at this moment to get that support cut, because it's Pakistan that is keeping the Taliban alive to an extent, and it's China that is keeping Pakistan alive. Pakistan has only got one working, credible institution, which is the military. It's a failed democracy. It's failed economically. If they think that the military is not going to get the support from China, then Pakistan will have to do whatever China says in order to survive as a nation.
Well, how important is this posturing, this manoeuvring that is currently going on, and how can the wake of these devastating attacks in the United States actually affect the balance of power in Asia?
Well, it could be fairly huge because both China and Russia are threatened by Islamic insurgencies on their borders. If they come on board on this, and they won't come on board necessarily on military strikes, but they will on intelligence sharing. Pakistan and China have got key intelligence things into the Islamic communities. If they come on board, you actually get a seismic shift of China, India, of course, Russia and the US against whatever this rather shadowy Islamic threat is at the moment.
If China does withdraw its military support for Pakistan, is that also likely to affect Pakistan's support for Kashmiri militants?
Well, I think that's another huge knock-on, because Pakistan is in fact the only nation accused of sending its own troops under an Islamic banner across a foreign border. So I think this is an opportunity, if you want to call it that, for the US and the West and China and Russia to get together and say, let's solve these small problems which have become very localized, because they are in fact a much wider problem. And Kashmir is probably the most dangerous small problem that we have at the moment on the global stage.
Humphrey Hawksley, thank you very much for joining us. Well, the government in India has set up special phone lines in Delhi and in America for the victims of the World Trade Center attacks who may be of Indian origin. It's not yet clear how many Indians or people with links to the country may have died, but a number of prominent Indian companies had offices in the World Trade Center. The two largest information technology companies in the country had hundreds of workers in New York. Our correspondent in Delhi, Daniel Lack, looks at the impact of the tragedy on India.
some companies.
A hot, weary, frustrating vigil for the Narula family. Tuesday's terror in America has invaded their South Delhi home. A granddaughter, Monica, is among the missing in New York. She and her elder sister were working in the World Trade Center that grim day. Only the sister has come out so far alive. Monica's family in India is having the worst week of their lives.
We are just hoping against hopes. All the time I will say against hopes, till we get some good news. And as our faith teaches us, we are praying only to His Almighty for our safety.
The Indian government has set up its own phone lines to handle frantic calls about missing friends and relatives. This one in Delhi, others in America. Officials don't want to speculate about numbers, but some newspapers are saying up to 10% of the victims in New York could have links to this country. It's why India is so quick to offer its help to the United States.
Just as terrorism targets the innocent and is not specific to race or caste or creed or faith, it covers 360 degrees of the azimuth.
With sad irony, it's the very successes of India's software and computer services industry and its information technology schools that brought so many citizens of this country to live and work in New York. It's not clear how many people from India were victims of the New York and Washington attacks. But in middle-class neighborhoods like this one all over the country, connections to America are many. And scenes of bereavement, frustration, and desperate hope are not hard to find. Daniel Lack, BBC News, Delhi.
Well, now for a look at the impact of the attack in America on business across Asia. Here's Aruna Iyengar. Aruna.
Thanks very much, Keshni. Stock markets in Japan and Hong Kong finished Thursday higher. There's hopes the US Federal Reserve will lower interest rates before its October meeting to bolster the US economy. Meanwhile, Japan's economy continues to slump. The government's quarterly economic report shows a sharp decline in the country's key export sector. And the country's current account surplus fell 28% in July from a year earlier to $6.4 billion. The atrocities in the US have sparked a rush for gold in Thailand. Dealers in Bangkok's Chinatown sold out of stock after being swamped by anxious buyers. People are nervous because of the major security operation to protect US interests in the kingdom. Gold prices eased back to $279 an ounce in New York trading after prices soared in the aftermath of the attacks on Tuesday. In other news, Air New Zealand appears to have been rescued from the brink of bankruptcy. Joint owners Singapore Airlines and the investment group Brearley have each pumped $64 million into the group. The rescue plan has been approved at New Zealand's government, which has also offered the company a loan of $233 million. Here's our business reporter, Martin Shankelman.
Air New Zealand has been crippled by large debts which have taken it to the edge of collapse. Under the terms of the rescue, the New Zealand government is to lend it $250 million American to keep it afloat. Singapore Airlines will also increase its stake in the business from 1/4 to 1/3. The move is seen as an attempt by Singapore to build its presence within Australasia. But the biggest problem remains, the plight of ANZ, which Air New Zealand bought 5 years ago. ANZ is losing around $750 million each day, and the company has now taken legal protection from its creditors to stave off bankruptcy. The plight of the airlines reflect the wider crisis within the industry caused by this week's terrorist attacks in Manhattan, which have hit passenger numbers and damaged investor confidence. Airline officials are now warning that the entire industry is heading for a very rough time. Martin Shankelman, BBC News.
Well, let's take a look now at the Asian stock market action and how that's been faring without a lead from the US stock market. Looking over, the Nikkei 225 in Japan finished the session slightly up 3 points. The Hang Seng was up 75 points. Both those markets hoping for an interest rate cut from the US Federal Reserve ahead of its meeting. It's scheduled to have a meeting on October the 2nd. The Taipei index was down at 244 and the Singapore STI down 11. Well, that's all the business news for the moment. Back to you, Kesney.
Thank you very much, Aruna. Well, just time for a reminder of our main news. The biggest manhunt in the United States history is underway to find the accomplices of the aircraft hijackers who carried out Tuesday's massive suicide attacks. The Attorney General has confirmed that some of the hijackers were trained as pilots and were part of a complex organisation. The FBI says that it's identified 50 people involved. The hunt has been extended worldwide, and the German police have arrested a man in Hamburg. They've also identified an apartment where 2 suspects are believed to have lived. President Bush has said that Americans should resist any temptation to retaliate for the attacks by targeting Arab Americans and Muslims. He declared tomorrow as a national day of remembrance for those who died. Commemorations have also been held in many parts of the world, including Jerusalem. Well, that's it from this special edition of Asia Today.
Deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
Hello and welcome to a look at the BBC's World Weather. We begin off the eastern coast of China with a Typhoon Nari. Continuing to track its way west, the winds are beginning to die down a little, but still seeing gusts of up to 150 kilometres per hour. It looks set to edge its way ever closer into the eastern coast of China, losing some of those showers on Friday and picking up more in the way of persistent rain and strong winds by Saturday. It's a wet picture through many parts of Asia at the moment as well, with a front snaking through Japan, keeping the story on a very damp note, certainly for Friday and Saturday. Brighter as we head into North Korea and around the Yellow Sea, quite a clear spell on its way too for southern China. More showers as we edge towards the remains of the Indian monsoon at the moment. The heaviest rains confined around the western side of the Bay of Bengal. The story further north and west is a largely dry, bright and sunny one. And similarly hot and sunny as we make our way into the Gulf. Certainly for Saudi Arabia, plenty of unbroken sunshine to come here. A little more in the way of low cloud and mist around, particularly around the Omani coast, and possibly enough cloud to give the odd shower in the Yemen, but heavy downpours as we work our way across equatorial Africa. We've seen some significant downpours out of these showers. They should be shifting out of South Africa in the coming days. We've certainly seen some significant rainfall figures in Johannesburg. It will be a welcome return to a drier spell in the next couple of days. Further north, and we see some of the sunshine from northern Africa spilling into the Mediterranean basin. Plenty of showers, though, still to work their way through central areas of Europe. But the showers have cleared from the Canadian Cities League, and it's a largely dry and sunny story for many of the places we show here. We will see some more showers as we head towards the Great Lakes, some showers working into the northeast and along the length of the Rockies. Heavy downpours likely for Florida in the coming days too. Out of this system, 08, set to continue working its way northeast, pushing some heavy rainfall in as it does so. Things settle down a little through parts of Central America, more showers into the north of South America. A brighter time, though, on its way to the south, and I'll leave you with a summary for Asia and Australia.